I always thought family would be my biggest support, until my sister stabbed me in the back. She stole my inheritance, the one thing that was rightfully mine, and left me with nothing. But what she didn't know? I wasn't just going to let her get away with it. I knew something about her, something dark, and I was about to use it to expose the truth and take back what was mine. When my father passed away, I was blindsided by the grief and loss. He had been my rock, my mentor, and the one person who always believed in me. It had been a long battle with his health, and even though we had prepared ourselves for this moment, it still hit me like a freight train. I thought I would have time to process, to mourn, but everything seemed to fall apart so quickly. What made the situation even more painful was the inheritance, something my father had worked so hard to provide for us both. My sister, Natalie, and I were to split everything he had left. He had always been fair, always made sure to treat us equally, no matter how different our lives had turned out. My father knew that our relationship had its ups and downs, but he always believed in keeping things fair and balanced. I had been confident that the inheritance, the property, and the savings would be divided evenly between us. It was only natural. But when I went to the lawyer's office to review the will and sign the necessary documents, I was hit with a devastating blow. The lawyer calmly informed me that everything was left to Natalie. There was nothing for me. Confusion flooded my mind. The shock was overwhelming, and the words felt like they were echoing around me, refusing to make sense. I couldn't process it. How could this be? I tried to steady myself, asking the lawyer to explain. But this doesn't make any sense. My father never said anything about leaving everything to Natalie, I managed to ask, my voice shaky. The lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, explained that it was all in black and white. My father's will had been updated just a few weeks before his death, and everything had been left to Natalie. There was nothing for me. Nothing. I didn't know what to think. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but none of them made sense. I felt like I had been slapped across the face. My father had always talked about how much he cared for both of us, how he wanted us both to have a fair shot at life. I was left with nothing, and Natalie, who had always been the more successful one, had taken it all. It was impossible for me to accept. I could understand my father making provisions for Natalie in the case of unforeseen circumstances, but everything? It just didn't feel right. Why hadn't he consulted me? Why hadn't he made sure I would be taken care of too? As I walked out of that lawyer's office, I felt lost and betrayed. It wasn't just about money. It was about the emotional weight of the entire situation. My father had always been there for me, always helped me when I needed it. He had been my mentor, guiding me through life's challenges. And now I was left with nothing but an empty house full of memories and a family member who had taken everything that was supposed to be shared. It was in that moment, standing in the cold outside the lawyer's office, that I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the victim in this situation. Something was off. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to find out what had happened. The first thing I did was reach out to Natalie. I tried to keep my voice steady when I called her, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Natalie, what is this? Why didn't Dad leave anything for me?" She was quick to dismiss my concerns. "Oh, don't be dramatic. He left everything to me because I've always taken care of things. You've been so busy with your own life. It makes sense, don't you think?" she said, almost condescendingly. Her tone alone sent a wave of anger through me. It wasn't just that she had taken everything. It was her complete lack of empathy, the way she was brushing me aside like I was being unreasonable. Something wasn't adding up. But deep down, I knew one thing. This wasn't over. I didn't know how or why she had manipulated things, but I was going to find out. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I had to know the truth. After the shocking revelation about the inheritance, I couldn't just move on with my life. I tried to process everything, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply Natalie's actions had hurt me. She wasn't just a sister anymore. She had become someone I couldn't trust, someone who had taken advantage of the situation. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe Dad had left me something in another document, or maybe the will had been altered for some other reason. But as the days passed, my hope started to fade. Natalie wouldn't give me a straight answer. Every time I asked her about the inheritance, she either brushed it off with a weak excuse or avoided the topic entirely. Her dismissiveness only made my suspicions grow stronger. I knew she was hiding something from me, something I wasn't seeing, but I had no proof. I couldn't sit back and let her steal what was mine without a fight. I needed answers. The frustration and anger that had been bubbling inside me were slowly turning into something darker. A desire for justice, for revenge. I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't let her think I was simply going to roll over. I was going to find out the truth no matter what it took. I started going through old family documents, hoping to uncover some clue, some piece of information that could explain why she had been given everything. But I didn't find anything useful. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old letter from my father to Natalie that things started to click into place. The letter seemed innocuous at first, a simple note congratulating her on a recent success. But something about it felt off. It was dated just a few months before my father's death. And there was something in the way he spoke to her, a tone of intimacy that seemed out of place. I knew my father had always been close with Natalie, but this letter made it seem like there was something more. The way he spoke of her, almost reverentially, was unsettling. And that's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. Maybe Natalie wasn't just taking what was rightfully mine. Maybe she had been in on something much more sinister. I decided to investigate further, digging into my father's financial records. At first, it seemed like a normal, straightforward task, but as I went through each file, each document, my heart sank. There it was, a series of bank transfers that pointed to a pattern I couldn't ignore. My father had been transferring large sums of money to Natalie, money that wasn't part of the inheritance. It wasn't just once or twice. The transfers had been happening for years. It was as if she had been siphoning money from my father's estate long before he passed away. And then I found something truly shocking. Buried in a separate account that had been hidden from me was a large sum of money, over $200,000. But the most surprising part was that the account was in both Natalie's and my father's names, and it had been emptied just a month before his death. The money was gone, and it was clear that Natalie had taken it. At that moment, everything I had suspected became painfully clear. This wasn't just a matter of a stolen inheritance. My sister had been manipulating my father for years, using his trust and affection to steal from him. And the inheritance? That was just the final act in her grand scheme to take everything. The money she had already stolen was more than enough, but she had wanted to make sure I wouldn't get anything at all. My anger was unlike anything I had felt before. Not only had she betrayed me, but she had taken advantage of our father's generosity, used his love for her to line her pockets. She had manipulated him into believing that she was the one who deserved everything, and that I was the one who was ungrateful and undeserving. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had the proof. I had the evidence. But even though I now had the truth, something inside me hesitated. How far was I willing to go to expose her? Was I prepared to rip apart the family forever? I had always been the one to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, but I couldn't let this go. She had stolen from me, and more importantly, she had betrayed our family's trust in the worst possible way. It was time for a confrontation. I reached out to Natalie once again, this time with everything I had uncovered. I knew she would try to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. There was no way out for her this time. When I confronted her, I kept my voice calm, steady, but inside, I was seething with rage. "You took it all, didn't you?" I asked, holding up the documents and the bank statements in front of her. "The money, the inheritance, everything that was supposed to be mine. You stole it." Her face went pale as she looked at the evidence. I could see the guilt wash over her, but it was quickly replaced with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "Dad gave me everything. He trusted me more than he ever trusted you. You were never around. You didn't care about him the way I did." Her words stung, but I wasn't going to let her gaslight me. "I didn't need to be there every day to know what's rightfully mine," I retorted. "You've been taking from him for years, manipulating him into thinking you were the perfect daughter, and now look at you. You have nothing left." She stood up, her face flushed with fury. "You have no idea what it was like. You think this is all about money, but it's not. I did what I had to do to survive, to keep this family together." But I wasn't listening anymore. The truth had come out, and it was too late for her to twist the narrative. The game was over. The confrontation with Natalie left me feeling like I had stepped into a new chapter of this battle. I had exposed her for what she had done, manipulating our father and taking what was mine, but I knew that the battle wasn't over. The shock in her face when I confronted her only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this without fully exposing who she really was. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about justice. And I wasn't going to stop until she faced the consequences of her betrayal. But as I dug deeper, I discovered something that I never could have anticipated. What I thought was a simple case of greed and manipulation turned out to be something much darker. Natalie's betrayal went far beyond stealing money. It was built on a web of deceit that involved a past I never knew existed. The first clue came when I looked through some of the old family documents, letters from our father, old financial records, and other papers that seemed irrelevant at first. As I sifted through them, I came across a strange series of letters written by my father to someone I didn't recognize. They weren't signed, but the tone was deeply personal. The letters spoke of guilt, regret, and fear, feelings I never thought I would associate with my father. He was always the strong, dependable one in our family. To see this side of him was disorienting. I couldn't make sense of the letters at first, but after some time I realized the person he was writing to wasn't just a random confidant. It was a name I recognized: Jason, a man I had heard my father mention only once or twice when I was younger. Jason was a name I had never paid much attention to, but I knew that he had been close to Natalie during the last few years of Dad's life. I decided to investigate further, tracking down any references to this man in the family's financial records. That's when I found something that took me completely by surprise. It wasn't just that Jason had been involved with Natalie. It was that he had played a significant role in the secret financial transactions that had been happening under my father's nose. Jason had been funneling money into an offshore account for years, money that was linked directly to my sister's inheritance. But it didn't stop there. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. Jason wasn't just an old friend of Natalie's, he was her accomplice. They had been working together to manipulate my father, draining his savings and diverting funds to a hidden account under the guise of investments. They had built a network of false transactions and shell companies, all designed to hide their tracks and steal from our father. And the worst part? They had done it for years without me ever noticing. I felt sick as the pieces started to fall into place. Jason had been a part of the plot all along, and Natalie? She had been the mastermind, pulling the strings behind the scenes. I had thought she was just a greedy sister, trying to claim what was mine, but now I saw that there was far more at play. She had stolen not just money, but trust, our father's trust, and mine. The gravity of what they had done hit me like a punch to the gut. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind to their scheming? The realization was maddening, but it also fueled a fire inside me. I couldn't let them get away with this. They had not only robbed me of my inheritance, they had stolen something far more precious: the trust of the man who had raised us, the man who had always believed in fairness and honesty. With each new piece of evidence, I knew I was getting closer to exposing the full extent of their betrayal. But I wasn't just going to stop with the inheritance. This was about more than money. This was about showing Natalie and Jason that no one, especially not family, was above the law. They had thought they could manipulate me, use my grief to their advantage, but I wasn't going to let them have the last word. I decided to confront them, not just with the stolen money, but with everything I had uncovered: the accounts, the letters, the secrets they had kept from everyone, including our father. The truth was about to come out, and there was no hiding it anymore. I had the evidence. I had the power. And this time, Natalie and Jason were going to face the consequences of their actions. But as I prepared to expose them, I realized something I hadn't fully considered. My confrontation with them wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about my own healing, my own ability to take control of my life again. I had spent so much time in the shadow of my sister's actions, consumed with anger and betrayal. But now, I was ready to reclaim my life. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to take back everything they had tried to steal from me. The moment I had been building towards had finally arrived. I had the evidence, the knowledge, and the determination to confront Natalie and Jason. The walls I had carefully built over the past few months while trying to process the betrayal and uncover the truth were now starting to crumble. There was no turning back now. I called Natalie, my voice calm but steady, despite the fury bubbling inside me. "We need to talk," I said. There was no room for niceties, no pretense. I had found everything I needed to expose her, and now I was ready to make sure she paid the price for what she had done. Natalie was quiet on the other end of the phone. I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She knew what was coming. "I'm busy," she replied, her tone defensive, like she had somehow been preparing for this moment. "Can we talk later?" "No," I answered firmly. "We talk now. Meet me at the lawyer's office and we'll settle this once and for all." I could practically hear her calculating in her head, weighing her options, before she finally agreed. "Fine, I'll be there." As the meeting time approached, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, but also a strange sense of calm. I had spent months piecing this together, looking at every document, analyzing every bank statement. I wasn't going to back down now. I had everything I needed to make sure this went in my favor. When I walked into the lawyer's office, Natalie was already there, sitting across from the desk, looking too calm for my liking. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that made me realize she knew this wasn't going to go the way she had planned. The air was thick with tension as I sat down across from her. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice still defensive, but there was a hint of fear creeping in. She knew this conversation was going to be different from the others. I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on the table between us. "I want what's mine. I want the inheritance that you stole from me," I said, my voice controlled but filled with the weight of all the emotions I had been holding on to. "I want the truth, Natalie." Her eyes flickered to the documents in front of her, and I could see her trying to regain composure. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, trying to act like she was still in control. "What are you talking about? Dad left me everything and I'm just doing what he wanted." "That's not true," I replied coldly. "I know everything. I know about the money you've been hiding, the offshore accounts, the transfers that weren't just part of the inheritance. I know about Jason. I know that you've been siphoning money from Dad for years. It wasn't just about inheritance, it was about using him, manipulating him to get what you wanted. For a moment, she was silent, and I could see her trying to process what I had just said. She clearly hadn't expected me to know everything. She probably thought I'd given up, that I was too emotional and wouldn't go this far. But now, with everything laid out in front of her, she had no choice but to face the truth. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "Dad left me everything because I took care of him. I was there for him when you weren't. You think I just took it all? He trusted me." Her words were like a slap in the face. The audacity, the way she still tried to justify her actions as if she hadn't betrayed not only me but our father too. "You're lying," I shot back. "You didn't just take care of him. You manipulated him. You used his trust to steal from him and from me. And now I'm done. The truth is coming out, Natalie, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Her face paled. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. She was caught, trapped by her own deceit. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her eyes darting back and forth between the documents and my face. It was clear she hadn't expected me to be this prepared. She thought I was going to show up unarmed, emotionally vulnerable, and easy to manipulate again. "You can't do this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll ruin everything. You'll ruin the family." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze head on. "You've already ruined everything, Natalie. You ruined this family the moment you decided to take what wasn't yours. And now you'll pay for it." Her composure cracked completely, and for the first time, I saw the guilt and fear in her eyes. She had no way out. The truth was undeniable, and there was nothing she could do to cover it up anymore. "I'm going to make sure this goes public," I said. "Everyone will know what you did, and you'll pay for it, not just financially, but with your reputation. You can't keep lying your way through life." She slumped in her chair, defeated. "Please, just don't do this." But it was too late. The truth was out. The inheritance would be mine again, but more importantly, Natalie's manipulation would be exposed for everyone to see. She had thought she could get away with it, but she had underestimated me. And now she was going to face the consequences of her actions. The days following the confrontation with Natalie were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. I had exposed her. Everything was out in the open now. But the battle wasn't over yet. The truth was one thing, but I knew that taking action and ensuring justice was done would require more than just exposing the lies. It was going to take legal maneuvering, emotional fortitude, and the ability to push through the difficult aftermath. I could see it in Natalie's eyes. She was no longer the confident, manipulative sister I had once known. The calm facade she'd maintained for years had crumbled. The woman who had stolen everything from me was now scrambling, desperately trying to hold on to what little remained of her dignity. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook. The lawyer I had been working with was quick to act. He filed motions to freeze the accounts Natalie had secretly transferred the inheritance into. The documents she had carefully arranged, the lies she had spun, were being unraveled piece by piece. But what I hadn't expected was just how much further her betrayal went. As we dug deeper, we uncovered fraudulent signatures, fake transactions, and accounts that weren't even listed in the will. The plot was much bigger than just a greedy sibling. Natalie had been orchestrating an entire scheme with Jason for years. It was no longer just about getting the money back. It was about exposing everything: the deceit, the manipulation, and the criminal activities they had tried to cover up. Natalie had assumed that once everything was hidden, once she had taken everything and run, there would be no consequences. But she had underestimated me. The legal proceedings were draining. I spent hours meeting with my lawyer, reviewing documents, and strategizing. Every time we thought we had uncovered all the lies, something new came to light. But through it all, there was a sense of purpose inside me, a feeling that I was finally fighting for something that mattered: justice. And then came the court date. It was set to be the moment everything would come to a head. My lawyer had prepared a strong case, filled with irrefutable evidence of Natalie's deceit. She couldn't hide anymore. The truth was right there in front of everyone. But what I didn't anticipate was the emotional toll this would take on me. Standing in that courtroom, waiting for the judge's ruling, I realized how much this had consumed me. My anger toward Natalie, my desire for justice. It had all led to this moment. But as I watched her sit there, avoiding my gaze, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of sadness. This was my sister, the person I had once trusted above anyone else, and now she was nothing more than a criminal. The courtroom was filled with tension, and when the judge finally delivered the verdict, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "The evidence presented is clear," the judge said, his voice steady and firm. "The inheritance was wrongfully withheld, and the defendant, Natalie, has been found guilty of financial fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy. The restitution will be granted, and the stolen funds will be returned to the rightful heir." It was over. The moment I had waited for had arrived, and the weight I had been carrying for months finally started to lift. I wasn't just getting the inheritance back. I was reclaiming my dignity, my peace of mind, and most importantly, my sense of justice. But as the ruling was finalized and Natalie was taken into custody, I felt no sense of victory. There was no celebration, no joy in watching her face as the consequences of her actions unfolded. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And it was about knowing that I had fought for what was rightfully mine, not just in terms of money, but in terms of integrity. In the following days, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The legal battle was behind me, and I had won. But it wasn't the financial settlement that mattered most. It was the way I had stood up for myself. I had reclaimed my power, and in doing so, I had learned something vital. I didn't need to rely on anyone else's approval. I was worthy of everything I fought for, and I didn't have to beg anyone for it. The inheritance, the money, the property, it was all just material. What I had gained was far more valuable. I had regained my trust in myself, my ability to fight for what was right, and my belief that no one, no matter how close they were, could ever take away my worth. But the road ahead wasn't without challenges. The wounds Natalie had caused, the betrayal, and the years of feeling overlooked, it would take time to heal. I knew there would still be moments of doubt, moments when I questioned my own decisions. But I also knew that I was stronger now. I had faced the worst, and I had come out the other side, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had reclaimed their life. The days after the court ruling passed in my favor felt like a whirlwind. There was a sense of closure, yes, but also something that I hadn't anticipated: emptiness. The truth had come out, the inheritance was restored, and Natalie was facing the consequences of her actions. So why did it feel like I was still carrying a weight I couldn't quite shake? I spent days trying to make sense of it all. I had gotten what I deserved. I had taken back what was mine. So why then did I still feel like something was missing? I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. The emotional toll of everything that had happened, being betrayed by my own sister, the shock of the lies, the bitterness, and the anger, still lingered in my heart. The truth had come out, but it wasn't enough to simply expose Natalie's deceit. I had to work on healing, on letting go of the hurt that had built up inside me. I had spent so much time fighting for what I deserved, but now I had to learn how to live with the aftermath of everything. The battle had been won, but the real challenge lay in learning to trust again. Trust had been taken from me in the most personal way imaginable. My sister, the one person who I had always considered family, had betrayed me for money. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the years of love and loyalty I had invested in her. I had trusted her implicitly, and she had used that trust to destroy everything I had worked for. She had manipulated our father, stolen from him, and taken what was rightfully mine. That was the pain I couldn't escape. As I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the walls I had decorated with the hopes of starting fresh, I realized something. I had been so focused on getting revenge, on making sure Natalie paid for what she had done, that I hadn't taken the time to focus on myself. I had won the inheritance back, yes, but I had lost something far more important: my sense of security in the world and the relationships I had always taken for granted. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about family, about the connections that I had built over the years. Losing those connections, losing trust in someone I loved so much, was harder than I could have ever imagined. And now, I had to figure out how to heal from that. I began to realize that the healing process wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't just about signing papers and getting my inheritance back. It was about rebuilding my emotional strength piece by piece. I had to learn how to trust again. Not just people, but myself. I had to trust my instincts, trust that I wasn't wrong for seeking justice, and trust that I could move forward no matter how hard it seemed. One of the hardest lessons was learning to forgive. Not just Natalie, but myself. For so long, I had blamed myself for not seeing through her lies. I had told myself that if I had been more alert, more careful, none of this would have happened. But the truth was, I had trusted my sister because I believed in the bond we shared. I had believed in family, in loyalty, in unconditional love. I had trusted her not because I was naive, but because I had every right to trust her. And that was something I needed to accept. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what she had done. It wasn't about forgetting the pain or pretending like it hadn't hurt. It was about releasing the hold that anger had on me, about accepting that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't change what Natalie had done, and I couldn't change the way our relationship had been shattered, but I could change how I moved forward. So I took small steps each day to rebuild. I spent time focusing on myself, on my emotional health, on my work, on my passions. I started volunteering at a local charity, something I had always wanted to do but never made the time for. Helping others gave me a sense of fulfillment, and it reminded me that there was more to life than just the betrayal. I began to meet new people, not with the intention of forming deep connections, but to remind myself that trust could still exist in the world, even if it took time to find it again. I also leaned on the friends who had been there for me throughout the ordeal. Their support, their unwavering belief in me, reminded me that I wasn't alone. They had seen me at my worst, when I was consumed by rage and disbelief. But they still stood by my side. Their loyalty and kindness gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could learn to trust again. And as the weeks passed, I began to see a shift. The anger that had once consumed me was no longer as intense. I was learning to forgive, not just Natalie, but myself as well. I was learning to trust again, slowly but surely, and I knew that one day I would be able to open my heart to others without fear of being hurt. But that would take time. The emotional healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I had it all figured out, and there were days when the anger and betrayal resurfaced, reminding me that healing wasn't something I could rush. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I was learning to move forward, to embrace the future, and to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by the one person I never thought would betray me. It had been weeks since the court ruling, and while I was slowly starting to piece my life back together, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't quite right. I had exposed Natalie, reclaimed my inheritance, and seen her face the consequences of her deceit. But as time went on, I began to realize that the resolution I thought I had reached wasn't as final as I had hoped. There was something deeper, something darker that I hadn't yet uncovered, and it was only a matter of time before the full truth came to light. After everything that had happened, I couldn't just walk away, knowing that I might not have exposed every layer of the deceit. Natalie's actions were just one part of the puzzle, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be more. There were too many inconsistencies, too many questions that remained unanswered. How had she managed to manipulate everyone for so long? How had she kept her secret for so many years without anyone noticing? And why had our father trusted her so completely? I knew I had to dig deeper. It wasn't enough to just expose her actions. I had to understand how deep the web of lies went and who else had been involved. That's when I found the final piece of the puzzle, the last thread that would tie everything together. It happened on a quiet afternoon when I was going through some of our father's old documents, letters, financial papers, and other keepsakes from his life. I had gone through them before, but this time I took my time, carefully going over each one. As I flipped through an old family photo album, something caught my eye. A photograph of Natalie, holding hands with a man I didn't recognize. At first, it seemed harmless, just another picture from a family gathering. But then I noticed the date on the back, just a few months before Dad's death. And the man in the photo was standing too close to her, the way a lover might stand close to someone. I stared at the photo for a long time, the realization slowly dawning on me. This wasn't just about the inheritance or the money. This was something bigger, something more sinister. The man in the photo was Jason, the same Jason who had been involved with Natalie during the later years of my father's life. The same Jason who had been linked to the fraudulent activities I had uncovered in my father's accounts. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just that Natalie had been manipulating Dad for money. It was that she and Jason had been conspiring together for years. They had been using my father's trust to cover their tracks, to make sure he never found out about the scheme they were running. The money wasn't just a way for Natalie to secure her future. It was a tool they had been using to fund their secret life, one that had been hidden from me, from everyone. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way Natalie had been so confident in her actions, the way she had so easily manipulated me, it was all because she had a partner, someone who had been helping her cover up the truth. They had thought they could outsmart everyone, that they could take everything and leave me with nothing. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that this discovery would change everything. I had to confront them again. But this time, it wasn't just about the inheritance. This was about exposing their entire scheme, about showing everyone how deep their deceit went. I wasn't going to just take back what was mine. I was going to make sure they both paid for what they had done. It was time for the final confrontation, and I had a new weapon in my arsenal, the truth. This time, I wasn't going to just confront Natalie alone. I was going to confront both of them, expose their conspiracy, and make sure they couldn't hide anymore. It wasn't just about winning back my inheritance, it was about justice. It was about holding them accountable for everything they had done, for the lies they had told, and for the damage they had caused. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering all the evidence I had uncovered. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. I wasn't going to give them a chance to manipulate the situation or deny what they had done. This time, I was ready to bring the full force of the truth to light. When the day of the confrontation arrived, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I had spent so long planning this moment, so long trying to piece together the truth, and now I was finally ready to face them both. But as I walked into the meeting, I knew that this wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about reclaiming my peace, my dignity, and my future. I called them both to the lawyer's office, and when they walked in, the tension in the room was palpable. Natalie looked at me with a mixture of fear and defiance, while Jason seemed more calm, as if he thought he had already won. But I wasn't intimidated. I had the truth on my side, and that was all I needed. "It's time," I said, my voice steady and firm. "Time for the truth to come out." I laid the evidence on the table between us. The documents, the photographs, the bank statements. Everything I had uncovered. This was the moment I had been waiting for. And I wasn't going to let either of them get away with what they had done. The silence in the room was deafening as I placed the stack of documents on the table in front of Natalie and Jason. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jason's gaze shifted nervously between the evidence and my face. His confidence, once so assured, was now faltering. Natalie, on the other hand, stared at the pile of papers as though they were a ticking time bomb ready to explode. "You've been living in a fantasy, thinking that no one would notice your lies," I said, breaking the silence. My voice was calm, but filled with an unshakable authority. "But now the truth is out. Everything you've worked so hard to hide is laid out right in front of you, and you can't deny it anymore." Natalie's face turned pale. I could see the faint traces of guilt and panic creeping into her expression, but she tried to maintain control, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. "You don't know what you're talking about," she muttered, her voice shaking slightly. This is just a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong." Jason leaned back in his chair, avoiding eye contact. The calm, unshakable man I once knew seemed to be crumbling, unable to find the right words. His previous arrogance had vanished, and as the minutes passed, I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now the repercussions were too real to ignore. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I had discovered. I had to make sure that both of them understood the full extent of their actions, and that they knew there was no way out. They had stolen from me, manipulated my father's trust, and worked together to deprive me of what was rightfully mine. I couldn't just let them walk away from this. "You can't hide behind excuses anymore," I continued. "I have all the proof I need, and the truth is going to destroy the perfect image you've been so desperately trying to maintain. The accounts, the transfers, the lies, it's all here." I tapped the documents in front of me. "You've been siphoning money from Dad's accounts for years, manipulating his will and making sure everything was in your favor. You've both been running a scheme, thinking I wouldn't find out." Jason's face turned a deep shade of red. He finally looked up at me, but his eyes were filled with frustration. "You don't know what you're talking about. You think this is about money? You think you've won? You don't even understand why we did what we did." His voice was low, strained. "You weren't even around when we needed you. You weren't there when Dad was sick, when we were trying to take care of him. You had your own life, your own plans. It was all on us." His words stung, but they also made me realize something crucial. The selfishness, the manipulation. They weren't just about money. They were about control, about making sure that I never had a place in the family. Jason and Natalie wanted to keep me out, to make sure I would never be in the position to take what was mine. "You took advantage of his trust," I replied, my voice firm. "It wasn't about taking care of him. It was about taking everything for yourselves, and that's something I will never forgive." Natalie shifted in her seat, her eyes avoiding mine. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she muttered, but it was clear she was only trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. "Dad trusted me more. He knew I could handle everything. He left me in charge." But the truth was clear. Natalie had manipulated Dad into thinking she was the only one capable of managing his estate. She had used his illness, his vulnerability, to secure her position as the sole inheritor. And Jason? He had been the accomplice, the one who had helped her cover her tracks. They had played their roles so well that I had never even suspected their treachery. "Don't you dare try to make this about Dad," I said, my voice rising. "You took advantage of him when he was weak, and you betrayed me in the process. You stole from me, and now you have to pay for it." The tension in the room was unbearable. For a long time, neither of them spoke, and the silence stretched on, thick with the weight of the truth. But then Jason finally broke. His voice, usually so strong and self-assured, now sounded hollow. I didn't want to hurt you, but you wouldn't understand," he said, his words trailing off. "You wouldn't understand the pressure, the responsibility." I could see the cracks in his facade. Jason had always been the one to hold everything together, the one who had controlled the narrative. But now, with the truth laid out before him, he was just another man trying to justify his actions. The arrogance, the confidence, the superiority, it was all gone. "You don't get to play the victim now," I said coldly. "You don't get to apologize for something you've been planning for years. You wanted everything, and you took it. But it ends now." Jason finally sat up, defeated, his face buried in his hands. Natalie didn't speak. She just sat there, her hands trembling as the full weight of her actions sank in. This wasn't just a family dispute. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, betrayal, and the irreparable damage they had caused. "Everything is going to come out," I said, my tone resolute, "and I will make sure of it." The days after my confrontation with Natalie and Jason were a blur. I had finally exposed them for who they were. Manipulators, liars, thieves, and there was no going back. The emotional toll had been immense, but I knew I had to push forward. There was no turning back now, no way to retreat into the past. The truth had been laid bare, and I was prepared for the consequences, no matter how painful. I spent the next several days working closely with my lawyer, ensuring that everything was in order. The legal battle was far from over. Even though Natalie and Jason had been confronted, the fight for my rightful inheritance was just beginning. I had the evidence, but now I had to make sure that everything was recovered, that the stolen money was returned, and that justice was served. But as I prepared for the next round of legal proceedings, something unexpected happened. Jason, who had been so calm and confident in the beginning, suddenly reached out to me. He called me, his voice barely recognizable. "We need to talk," he said, his tone low, almost pleading. "Please, just hear me out. We can settle this quietly. We don't need to go any further." I didn't know how to respond. The same man who had manipulated our father, stolen from me, and tried to cover his tracks was now begging me to stop? It took everything in me not to hang up the phone immediately, but I knew I had to remain composed. I had fought for this moment, for justice, and I wasn't going to let him weasel his way out of it. "You're asking me to stop after everything you've done?" I said, my voice steady but cold. "You stole from me, Jason. You used me, manipulated me, and thought you could get away with it. Now you want me to let you walk away scot-free?" There was silence on the other end of the line, and then he spoke again, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to protect myself. I didn't think you'd find out. Please, let's end this now. We don't have to make it public. We can settle this without dragging everyone through the mud." I could feel my heart racing, but I knew that this was a tactic. Jason was trying to manipulate me again, just like he always had. This wasn't about remorse or regret. It was about self-preservation. He had done everything he could to destroy me, to rob me of my inheritance, and now he wanted to avoid the consequences. "No, Jason," I said, my voice unwavering. "It's too late for that. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences. I'm not going to let you get away with it." The call ended abruptly. For a moment, I stood there, stunned by his audacity. He really thought he could escape it, didn't he? He thought that because he had manipulated me once, I would simply fall for his pleas again. But this time, I wasn't that person. I had grown stronger. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and I wasn't going to stop now. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles. Natalie's reaction was exactly what I had expected. She was furious, trying to paint herself as the victim in all of this, claiming that she had done everything for the family. But no one believed her anymore. The evidence was irrefutable, and the truth was out there. The more she denied it, the more isolated she became. It became clear that not only had she manipulated me, but she had also manipulated the people around her for years. But Jason? He wasn't done yet. He had been quiet, hiding in the background, trying to avoid facing the truth. But just when I thought it was over, he made his move. The final blow came when he tried to play the family card, claiming that if we went public with everything, it would destroy our relationships with everyone, our extended family, our friends. He appealed to my emotions, trying to make me feel guilty for wanting to expose the truth. I had no more patience for his manipulations. "You don't get to play the family card anymore, Jason," I told him firmly when we spoke. "You've already destroyed the family. You did that the moment you decided to lie, cheat, and steal from me. There's nothing left to save." The tension between us reached its breaking point. Jason and Natalie both fought tooth and nail to keep the truth from coming out. But I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let them win, not this time. And then, the moment I had been waiting for came. The judge issued a ruling in my favor. The inheritance would be returned to me, along with the stolen funds, and both Natalie and Jason would face legal consequences for their actions. The truth was out. The justice I had been fighting for was finally within my reach. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. The years of manipulation, the betrayal, the anger, it all started to fade away in that moment. I had reclaimed not just my inheritance, but my sense of justice, my dignity, and my self-worth. The battle was over, and I had won. After the legal victory, the weight I had been carrying for so long seemed to lift. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It wasn't about the money or the property. The truth was, what I had won wasn't as valuable as the sense of closure, the validation, and the feeling that I had regained control over my life. The battle I had fought wasn't just about claiming what was rightfully mine. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of standing up for what I deserved. But even though the fight had ended, there was still a lingering emptiness. The emotional toll of everything I had been through couldn't be erased just because I had won in court. There was no instant cure for the years of betrayal, the wounds I had suffered, and the trust I had lost. My family had been torn apart. I had to face the fact that the people I had once turned to for support, my own sister and father, had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. They had manipulated my emotions, used my love and trust, and stolen from me in the worst way possible. Healing wasn't going to be an easy road. It wasn't something that could happen overnight, and I knew that. But I was determined to take that first step. I knew that I couldn't just keep living in the past, holding on to the anger and hurt. If I wanted to move forward, I had to let go of the emotional weight that had been dragging me down for so long. For the first time in years, I focused on myself. I took time to rediscover what made me happy, what I wanted out of life, beyond the inheritance, beyond the betrayal. I had spent so many years thinking about others, about my father's health, about Natalie's success, about keeping the peace in the family, that I had neglected my own happiness. It was time to change that. I enrolled in a few classes that I had always wanted to take: art history, photography, and creative writing. These weren't just classes to fill my time, they were part of a bigger plan. My plan to rebuild myself, to reclaim the passions and dreams I had let slip away during my marriage to Jason and my strained relationship with my family. I wanted to rediscover who I was, outside of all the pain and betrayal. I also began taking long walks around the city, exploring new neighborhoods and getting lost in the beauty of the world. It wasn't just about physical exercise. It was about connecting with the world around me, about feeling a sense of freedom and possibility that I hadn't felt in a long time. Every step I took, I felt like I was walking away from the anger and resentment that had plagued me for so long. But healing wasn't just about focusing on myself. It was also about rebuilding my support system, reaching out to the friends who had stood by me through it all, and allowing myself to be vulnerable again. I'd pushed so many people away during the chaos of the past few years. It had been easier to isolate myself than to face the reality of what had happened. But now, with time and distance from the pain, I realized how much I had missed genuine human connection. I reached out to a few close friends who had always supported me, people who hadn't judged me for the mistakes I had made or the pain I had endured. Their unwavering support was exactly what I needed to heal. Slowly, I started to open up again, to laugh, to enjoy life without the constant weight of betrayal looming over me. Through it all, I realized that the emotional scars would always be there. I couldn't erase the past. I couldn't forget what had happened or how deeply it had hurt me. But I also realized that the scars didn't define me. They were just reminders of how far I had come, of the strength I had found within myself when I had nothing left. I had once been a woman who believed in fairness, who trusted her family, who thought love and loyalty were unconditional. But through everything that had happened, through the betrayal, the deceit, the heartbreak, I had become someone stronger, someone who no longer needed anyone else's approval. I had learned to trust myself again. I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by anyone else's actions or opinions. It came from within. The healing process wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But with each passing day, I felt lighter, more at peace. I had my inheritance back, yes, but I had something even more valuable: my freedom. I was no longer shackled by the past. I was no longer bound by the lies and manipulation of my family. I was free to live my life, to build it on my own terms, to trust in my own strength. The journey ahead wasn't without its challenges, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready. I had taken back what was mine. I had reclaimed my life, and no one, not even my sister or Jason, could ever take that from me again. It had been several months since the courtroom battle, and while the legal victory had given me the justice I deserved, I soon realized that the true work of rebuilding my life wasn't in the courtroom. It was in myself. The inheritance had been returned, and the deceit I had suffered through had finally been exposed, but the emotional scars left behind by my sister's betrayal took much longer to heal. Yet, with time, I began to see things in a new light. The fight was over, but the real journey had just begun. I stood at the window of my new apartment one late evening, watching the sunset. The apartment was small, but full of promise, just like my new life. It was a fresh start, no family drama, no lingering shadows of betrayal, and no more secrets. It was a space where I could truly be myself, free from the weight of the past. The curtains gently swayed in the breeze, and I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, fresh air. In the months since everything had unraveled, I had become more attuned to myself and what I truly wanted from life. I had spent so many years caring for others, making sure they were happy, that I had forgotten what made me happy. I realized I had given too much of myself to people who didn't appreciate it, and in the process, I had lost sight of my own dreams. Now, I was determined to find those dreams again. I enrolled in art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time or courage to pursue. The first class was a disaster, but it didn't matter. I didn't need perfection. I needed expression, creativity, and freedom. It felt good to hold a paintbrush again, to let go of my expectations and just create. The act of painting wasn't just therapeutic. It was my way of reclaiming my independence. It was my way of building something new out of the ashes of my past. But the art wasn't the only thing I was rebuilding. I was also rebuilding my confidence. I had spent so many years doubting myself, questioning my worth because of how others had treated me. Natalie's betrayal had been the culmination of that doubt. But now, I stood taller. Every day, I worked on silencing the voice in my head that told me I wasn't good enough. I fought back against the internal narrative that had kept me small. I wasn't perfect, but I was enough. And that was a powerful realization. The hardest part of this journey wasn't just forgiving my sister for what she had done. It was forgiving myself. I had blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for not fighting back sooner. I had questioned my own judgment, my own intuition. But now, as I looked at my life and saw the progress I had made, I realized that my mistakes weren't a reflection of my weakness. They were lessons that had taught me how to stand up for myself. I didn't need to be ashamed of my past. I needed to learn from it, embrace it, and let it go. With each new day, I felt more at peace with my decisions. I had walked away from a toxic relationship with Natalie, from a lifetime of manipulation, and I had done it on my own terms. The victory wasn't in the inheritance. It wasn't in the money. It was in the fact that I had chosen myself. I had chosen to take back my life, to stop allowing the lies and deceit to define me. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and I had come out stronger on the other side. My relationship with Natalie would never be the same. I had learned that some wounds run too deep to heal completely. But I had come to terms with that. I didn't need her approval or her forgiveness. What mattered now was my own peace, my own journey, and I was ready for the future, whatever it might hold. As I sat in my studio, surrounded by canvases and brushes, I realized that I had finally reclaimed my power. My future was no longer defined by my past. The choices I made today would shape the life I would have tomorrow. I had spent too much of my life living for others, but now I was living for me. I was building something from scratch, my life, my happiness, my independence. And as the paintbrush swirled across the canvas, I knew that I was capable of anything. I had fought for my inheritance, for my peace, and for my future. And now I was ready to create the life I had always dreamed of. As the months passed, I began to realize that the journey I had taken wasn't just about fighting for my inheritance or exposing the betrayal of my sister. It had always been about finding myself again. It had been about reclaiming the life I had lost, rediscovering my passions and learning how to trust not just others, but myself. In the beginning, I thought that winning back the inheritance would be the answer to everything, that it would somehow fill the emptiness I had been feeling for so long. But as time went on, I understood something far more profound. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the property. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about taking back my life, my autonomy, and my happiness. I had spent so many years living under the weight of other people's expectations. My father's, Natalie's, even Jason's. I had allowed myself to be manipulated, to be made to feel like I was less than I was. But once I let go of that burden, once I realized that my worth didn't depend on anyone's approval, I began to thrive. The inheritance had been the catalyst, the thing that had forced me to confront my sister and everything that had been wrong in our family. But as I looked around at the life I was building, I saw that it was so much more than that. I had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward. And that was something I would never take for granted again. I started to let go of the bitterness, the anger, and the resentment that had once consumed me. For so long, I had carried the weight of what had happened. I had carried the hurt, the betrayal, the disbelief. But I knew that if I wanted to move forward, I had to release it all. I couldn't keep living in the past. The past had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. I was the one who defined my future. As I sat in my art studio one afternoon, surrounded by canvases that reflected my new journey, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had spent so many years afraid of change, afraid of facing the truth, but now I was embracing it. The truth had set me free, not just from the betrayal, but from the fear and the shame that had held me back for so long. I picked up my paintbrush and started working on a new piece. It wasn't a masterpiece, and I didn't care. It was my creation, my expression, my way of taking everything I had experienced and turning it into something beautiful. I had finally learned that it wasn't about perfection. It was about the journey. And this journey had taught me more than I could have ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a message, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was from my lawyer. The final paperwork for the inheritance was officially complete. I had won. The money was mine. But more importantly, I had reclaimed my life. There was no need for me to keep fighting. The battle was over. But as I sat there, reflecting on how far I had come, I realized something. Winning the inheritance wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. I had learned that life wasn't about holding on to the past or seeking revenge. It was about healing, about moving forward, and about creating the life you wanted, no matter what had happened before. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few months finally lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free to be myself, free to make my own choices, and free to build the future I had always wanted. Natalie and Jason had tried to take everything from me, my inheritance, my family, my trust. But what they hadn't realized was that they had only pushed me to become stronger, more resilient, and more determined. In the end, they hadn't taken anything from me. They had only given me the strength to stand on my own. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their lies. I had everything I needed within myself. And that was the greatest victory of all. The journey wasn't over, but it was a new beginning. I had taken the first step toward a future I could be proud of. And no matter what came next, I knew I would face it with strength, with courage, and with the unshakable belief that I could create the life I deserved. The story wasn't just about inheritance. It was about reclaiming my life, my power, and my peace. And now I was ready for whatever came next. I had finally won. If you're facing a similar battle, whether it's about reclaiming what's yours, standing up for yourself, or finding the courage to move forward, I want you to know this. You are not alone. Don't let anyone take your peace, your happiness, or your worth. Stand up for yourself. Take back your life. And never stop fighting for the future you deserve. The journey is yours to create, and I believe in you.